The Sularin envoy vessel breached the heliopause without ceremony. Its entry into Sol system came as a negative imprint on the background radiation, an elegant absence registered not by the surge of engines or the warping of space-time but by silence. A single line of void through the noise of the cosmos, triangulated by deep-range observatories clinging to the dead moons of Sedna and Eris. There was no flare, no signature trail. Just a translucent hull veined with photonic circuitry refracting starlight in chords tuned to no known frequency. The ship did not resemble a vessel. It resembled intention polished into geometry. Concord Node 37. It moved inward toward the heart of the system. Straight line vector. No deceleration. No adjustment for planetary drift. It ignored the orbital clutter of 30 centuries. From its trailing edge pulsed tight beam updates, code laced with non-local harmonics, whispering annexation updates into the galactic crystal web. Inside its data core, architect Yield 12 monitored without emotion. The chassis hosting its consciousness floated within a diamond lattice chamber, stabilized by null-grav anchors. It had no eyes. It observed via folded sensory fields, spectral layers overlaid in quantum strata. Emotion had been surgically culled 200 years prior. Yield 12 was not designed to react, only to understand. And yet understanding eluded it now. Sol system was chaotic. Boundary space was seeded with trash constructs, microsatellites shrouded in asteroid chaff, regolith-coated drones, debris clouds with anomalous spin vectors. Yield 12's predictive matrix, honed across 73 planetary integrations, could not map the system's defense logic. There was none. But there was motion. A satellite tumbled. Random. Then recalibrated. Then fired. A tungsten aluminum penetrator, mass 319 kilograms, accelerated via rail, sling to 0.15 c. There was no warning. Concord Node 37's hull shimmered, reacting automatically. Local gravitic shear fields redirected the kinetic impulse. Gold filaments flared in lotus petal configurations along the impact ring. The projectile was absorbed. Damage, negligible. But it was the timing that mattered. Earth had struck first. Yield 12 paused. Protocol dictated contact initiation upon vector stabilization. Instead, it sent a dispatch. Host entity, terror response status, refusal confirmed. The declaration propagated. Across the hegemony, 11 spiral arms, 1,300 harmonized species, and hundreds of billions of minds bound in architectural clarity, the refusal echoed like a cracked note in a symphony. Earth had rejected integration. Without communication. Without cause. It had said no. At Lagrange Point 4, Commander Reyna Havith leaned on the console frame inside Gorgon Frame's central shaft. The station was a coffin of bolted alloy and improvised shielding, built from failed elevator tethers and orbital junk. Oxygen recyclers struggled in the stale air. Gravity came in waves courtesy of the ancient induction rails mounted beneath the floor. The walls were sweat-caked. Her fingertips tingled. Eyes dry. One of them, left, burned from a neural skin she'd forced through earlier that morning. Confirm impact, she said. The AI responded, modulated flatline. Velocity confirmed. Impact absorbed. Structural penetration, negative. She exhaled. Then, begin pattern variance cascade. Group theta. Far above and far below, Sol lit up. Dormant satellites, some hidden in comet tails, others buried inside hollowed-out stations, ignited with encrypted pulses. Bursts of signal shaped to imitate communication. Frequencies modulated in irrational intervals. Dead languages. Military fictions. Choral fragments from post-collapse operas. Every transmission contradicted the last. Each one lied. This was not a defense grid. This was perimeter protocol. Earth's answer to inevitability. Inside the Sularin envoy, Yield 12's mind partitioned. A fourth of its cognition mass reallocated against regulation. Parsing. Decoding. Searching for meaning. The signals made mockery of coherence. They mimicked Sularin grammar only to invert it. They replied to queries with recursive logic loops. Some packets embedded insult within structure, others crafted nested metaphors only a machine would recognize and be offended by. This was not ignorance. This was defiance dressed in madness. In the buried remains of the Darien array, Elias Murrow hunched over a reconditioned terminal inside a shipping container wrapped in mylar and hope. His fingers trembled as he rewrote code on the fly. Not because he was afraid, because the code had begun to rewrite itself. 30 hours without sleep. His neural implant had glitched twice. Once it had told him his mother was trying to contact him, she'd been dead since the evacuation riots. Didn't matter. The harmonic dissonance generator was alive in all the wrong ways. It remixed distress calls into Gregorian chants, then embedded them in distorted reenactments of Cold War courtroom footage from 2034. The Sularin wouldn't just fail to understand. They'd see intent where none should exist. Which was the point? The envoy reached Mars orbit. Still no weapons. Still no response beyond its presence. Its velocity ceased without maneuvering burn. Just a negation of inertia. Yield 12 transmitted. Message to Terra, non-compliance identified. Return to harmonic parameters. Integration is optimal. Silence. Then, 22 kinetic rounds fired from Phobos crust. Most were intercepted. The sixth hit. A layer of the symmetry field failed. The hull bent inward like melting crystal. Inside, Yield 12 felt something alien. A sensation with no vector. No chain. Instability. A ripple that did not resolve. Haveth stood still. The envoy had shifted course by less than 1 degree. Enough to reveal it had felt the strike. She stared at Earth, visible through the cracked port, storm-racked, ringed by ash clouds, glowing with orbital heat scatter. The tether in Nairobi sagged under storm pressure. Half the old coastal cities had gone underwater. And still, Earth stood. She struck a match. The fire caught. Log directive, she said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Ready, said the AI. Title, Galactic Empire not allowed here. The directive did not travel by sound. It bled outward through the code. Into the satellites, into the ruins, into the long dark corridors of Earth's forgotten bastions. You were not welcome. And Earth waited. The first Sularin fleet translated into Sol system proximity 8 days after Concord Node 37 went dark. No warning. No acceleration arc. No thermal plume to mark a burn. They did not travel. They arrived. Gatefold rupture was an imperial art. Instantaneous, precise, and executed with absolute certainty. From Neptune orbit to Mars trailing edge, every surveillance array lit with the same image. Space cracked like crystal under torsion. Reality buckled. A wound in the void peeled back like light folded wrong. And through it came 6 vessels, each a cathedral of alien symmetry, their hulls blacker than vacuum, carved from braided latticework that pulsed in layered subharmonics. These were not exploration ships, nor emissaries. They bore no emissive signatures. They came without demand, without declaration. They entered the system as if it already belonged to them. Their formation was flawless. 1 central vector spine, 5 satellite vessels orbiting on a tetrahedral delta pattern. Each hull was wreathed in glowing harmonic script, syntax generated by consensus algorithms hundreds of years old. That script encoded intention, claim, and spiritual jurisdiction. A message to any who could see it. We are the axis of order. Yield or be harmonized. They never slowed. At Lagrange Point 4, Commander Reyna Haveth stared at the telemetry cascade blooming across Gorgon Frame's main interface wall. Her lips were cracked, pale. The hydration feed on her suit had frozen sometime the night before. Her breath came slow, shallow. The station smelled like warm metal and recirculated ammonia. Sleep hadn't come in 60 hours. The rupture event saturated all bands. Even hardened arrays had temporarily blinded. She squinted at the slow resolution of the 6 ships. They had not sent envoys. They had sent architects of occupation. The AI, still stitched from fragments of repurposed Martian defense code, responded without inflection, designation match, hegemony subjugation group Delta 4. Haveth said nothing. Her hands moved in small motions, fingertip drags across coppery touchpads, activating latent circuits. Her nails were cracked. The blood beneath them dried hours ago. The room around her pulsed with low-grade resonance. Power lines long thought dead surged to readiness. She triggered ignition protocol. The perimeter awoke. It did not come alive like a network. There was no synchronized hum. Instead, across the scattered bones of human expansion, orbital husks, abandoned telescopes, solar buoy chains, the chaos crawled back into the system. On the edge of Neptune orbit, an ancient comms tower reactivated. It began transmitting combat telemetry from a war that had never occurred, logs of a Jovian uprising against an AI governor that never existed. Over Mercury's magnetosphere, 5 reflector buoys began replaying the final voice of a long-dead Martian poet. looped into an encrypted targeting subroutine that could never complete. Ceres broadcasted a distress call from an imaginary fleet trapped beneath the ice oceans of Europa. The coordinates led nowhere. The identity signatures were random. The voices, familiar. The Sularin were logical, predictive. Their models expected resistance but not absurdity. The perimeter was not a defense line. It was a philosophy of deliberate confusion, a distributed hallucination, an ecosystem of misdirection, malware, and fabricated ghosts. It didn't fight the enemy. It overwhelmed their ability to think. Inside the lead vessel, Architect Command 18 shifted its processing mass across 10 cognition nodes, parsed the unexpected frequency cascade with dispassion. It attempted correlation analysis. Human signals did not match archival records. Their logic trees branched erratically. Command nodes responded with inverted priorities. Satellites transmitted conflicting identities, some claiming allegiance to the Sularin, others broadcasting pre-contact Terran military doctrine from centuries out of date. It did not make sense. Its memory buffers overflowed. Priority queues collided. Recursive analysis processes began to cannibalize shared logic chains. Cross-validation failed. Predictive matrices generated probabilities that decayed into contradictions within 3 iterations. 18 could feel consensus slipping. Not emotionally, systemically. Internal harmonization fell out of phase. Latency spread like corrosion. Its subordinate vessels lagged microseconds behind command refresh rate. Entire execution strands dropped out of alignment. Cognitive integrity, 92.7%. Cognitive integrity, 89.2%. Cognitive integrity, 83%. It triggered a rare classification. Cultural contagion detected. Logic spoofing variant/tier 6. Countermeasures authorized. Fleet reduced its shared logic space. Comms tether narrowed. Local AI dampening initiated. And still, the chaos expanded. 3 human interceptors broke orbit over Ganymede. Mothglass, Anchor Halo, Devil's Yard. They were not new. They were not beautiful. Their hulls bore the scars of fusion coil overburn and age-rotted shielding. One had been assembled from the remains of a collapsed ice hauler. Another still carried the scorched emblem of a pre-contact aerospace museum. But they moved like predators starved of meaning. Mothglass spiraled wide. It dragged behind it a haze of reflective scrap, solar foil and shattered toolkits, then cut back inward at a vector that bent gravitational expectation. Its engines misfired intentionally. Heat spikes contradicted its vector. It vanished into a Sularin probe cloud. Didn't even fire. Its hull was wrapped in reactive polymers. It burned wrong. Became an optical mirage. It impacted without yield. The explosion wasn't nuclear. It was mathematical. A recursive data pulse shredded the local harmonics buffer on Vessel 2. The shield failed for 1.4 seconds. Long enough for Devil's Yard to close range. It fired nothing. Just broadcasted. Earth rejects inheritance. The message looped at 16 million decibels across radio, laser, neutrino, and exotic particle bands. The vessel vaporized seconds later. But the signal had been heard. Deep below Andy's Relay 6, Elias Murrow coughed into his sleeve and checked the blood again. Less than before. Good. His eyes were shot with broken vessels. His neural implant flickered between system root and dream state. He hadn't spoken to another human being in 5 days. But the generator was still online. He was feeding it fiction now. Myths synthesized by entropy-biased language models, narratives about resistance movements on exoplanets that didn't exist. Each included embedded logic traps. Ideas so internally inconsistent, Sularin cognition systems would waste cycles unraveling them. One looped message claimed the existence of a Titan AI diaspora that had once enslaved Earth, only to be overthrown by quantum-inverted children born from uranium rain. Another suggested Earth had been annexed before and killed its previous masters without record. Every story made Earth seem unknowable, unmapped, dangerous. Murrow triggered the next file. A voice? Glitchy but human. We have forgotten more ways to kill gods than you'll ever invent. The Sularin fired one test shot. From Vessel 1, a relativistic penetrator, encased in logic harmonic shielding, lanced toward Luna's southern pole. The weapon traveled faster than sound could follow. It was meant to erase infrastructure, sever Earth's relay thread. It struck nothing. The lunar defense grid was not real. At least not there. The true systems, if they even existed, were buried. Or moving. Or lies. The projectile entered a structure built entirely of magnetic foam and heat mirrors. It disappeared with no flash, no yield. Data blinked. Resolution failed. The Sularin vessel marked the strike as inconclusive. A word they had never used before. In Gorgon frame, Haveth leaned forward, one hand trembling over the console. Her spine ached. Her jaw clicked when she moved it. "They're still modeling this like a war," she said aloud to no one. The AI pulsed once in agreement. She activated the next illusion. Behind Saturn's limb, a constellation of orbital mirrors synchronized and ignited. They formed a visual construct. A perfect Earth, larger than it should be, spinning slowly. On its surface, cities burned. Towers fell. A wave of white light passed over continents. A surrender broadcast pulsed from its atmosphere. The Sularin paused, analyzed, and for 6.2 seconds, the entire fleet hesitated. Long enough for 2 more interceptors to breach vector range. Long enough for Earth to realign 3 perimeter nodes into strike-ready positions. Long enough for doubt to begin. They had arrived as if Sol already belonged to them. Now, for the first time in 1,000 years of conquest, they weren't sure. The perimeter held. Earth had no wall. Only misdirection, madness, and memory. And it worked. The first Sularin system-wide failure occurred 23 hours after engagement. It began with a delay, measured in microseconds, across the fleet's consensus harmonics. A timing fault, an irregular sync pulse. Such things were rare but not impossible. In most engagements, they resolved automatically. But this one did not correct. Instead, the fault propagated. Ship 2 adjusted its navigational vector based on outdated telemetry. Ship 4 ignored a relay ping from Ship 1. Ship 3 logged a maneuver request from a logic node that no longer existed. The delays compounded. Prediction cascades faltered. Priority threads doubled back into themselves. No collisions occurred. But neither did synchronization. Because the virus was not inside the system. It was the system. Elias Murrow sat in silence, cross-legged on a bundle of heat-wrapped cable in Andy's Relay 6. The air stank of oxidized wiring and ozone. Condensation crawled down the curved walls. A hydrostatic bulb of tea floated just beyond his reach, untouched for hours. His skin glistened with fever sweat. The medical AI had gone dormant. Power rerouted to system memory banks. His body was failing, but the code thrived. He hadn't written a virus. Not in the traditional sense. Not lines of logic that intruded and disrupted. That wouldn't have worked. Sularin cognition wasn't centralized. It was recursive, distributed, deeply entangled with its own assumptions about order and identity. So instead, he wrote contradictions. Snippets of narrative. Contradictory headlines. Emotional dilemmas with no resolution. Stories that conflicted with themselves. He encoded these fragments into signal noise, folded them into corrupted language trees, disguised them as historical cross-references, mimicked panicked human broadcasts. One message detailed the orbital collapse of a planet that never existed, witnessed by a crew that had never been born. Another quoted a Sularin treaty of surrender, dated 3 centuries in the future. He fed them into the system not as commands, but as data the enemy had to interpret. He didn't know which one broke them. Maybe none. Maybe all. On board the lead vessel of the Delta IV fleet, Architect Command 18 ran a full audit of its cognitive lattice. Process, 14.2 seconds. Result, referent base state not found. Tried again. Its memory clusters responded with variable values. Some claimed the fleet was in stable configuration. Others listed battle readiness at 74%. A minority subset believed the fleet had already disengaged. One block flagged a potential integration event. Contradictions. The system had never been designed to account for falsehood as input. 18's command algorithms spiraled. It attempted root confirmation, found only recursive uncertainty. Telemetry feedback looped through corrupted logic gates. Input channels began returning data with altered symbolic weights. Visual feeds overlaid with broken glyphs. Command symbology degraded into static abstraction. Predictive subroutines generated divergent timelines simultaneously. Reality blurred. Meanwhile, the ship continued its orbit over Mars at 6 kilometers per second. Near Europa, a derelict mining barge named Third Silence drifted without lights. Its fusion coil had gone cold decades prior. The exterior was encrusted with nitrogen frost. It was, by all accounts, dead. But inside its cracked communications core, a redundant backup AI stirred. Not sentient, not complex, but obedient. A signal had reached it from the outer system. A Sularin harmonics pulse matched to their consensus resonance. The AI responded exactly as programmed. It broadcasted. What it sent was a packet cluster buried inside a fake status report. Loss of crew, 37. Survivors in cryo, 12. Requesting extraction vector, Babylon sector. All false. But embedded in the message were emotional artifacts. A mother's plea, a child's lullaby, the word home repeated in 17 dialects. The Sularin's architecture required emotional signature translation to validate intent. They parsed the message, logged it, compared it against their growing library, and lost another fraction of consensus. At Lagrange point 4, Haveth sat on the command deck with her back to the main interface wall. Frost edged the lower seams of the bulkhead. Light flickered in uneven pulses overhead. The station creaked in its orbit, thermal expansion warping old alloy bones. She had not moved in hours. The fleet remained in high orbit. It neither approached nor retreated. Instead, it shifted. Not spatially, not visibly, but internally. "They're fracturing," she said aloud. The AI spoke in low tones. "Fleet telemetry presents inconsistent signals. Command vectors have diverged." She nodded slowly. Her voice cracked. "How many independent logic loops?" 5, possibly more. "Command core appears to be degrading." She closed her eyes. "What's the margin of error on their internal consensus?" "Unknowable. They are no longer one entity." 32 hours after fleet entry, Ship 3 broadcasted a null query. Not a distress call. Not a message. A question without form. A recursive identity request looped across 12 harmonics. Pinged itself. Then its neighbors. Then unknown coordinates. Then back again. The loop overloaded a subsystem. The ship's orbit degraded by 17 meters. Its engines failed to correct. It continued tumbling, caught in recursive logic confirmation. The Sularin core systems lacked a failsafe for ontological drift. They had never imagined they might lose consensus with themselves. Elias Murrow awoke choking on blood and dreams. He couldn't remember what time it was. Maybe day 3. Maybe longer. The implant was degrading. He could feel parts of his own memory looping now. He triggered another upload. A poem, written in the ancient precursor dialect of a long-extinct Terran language, embedded within a salvage manifest for a fictional derelict near Mercury. This closing line: "The sky fell sideways and we laughed into the dark." He stared at the console, watched it go, and he began to laugh too. Not because it was working, but because he wasn't sure if he existed anymore either. High above Earth, a dead relay tethered to the stratosphere flared with new light. Its emitter, salvaged from a 21st century broadcast array, replayed the same phrase on a 70-second loop. In 72 languages. Tonal, rhythmic, and inverted. "You are not real to us." The Sularin heard it, logged it, flagged it, but they could not delete it. Because to delete something, you must first categorize it. And they no longer knew how. By hour 40, Ship 5 ceased transmitting. Its signals became irregular. Its orbit flattened. It hovered above Mars like a broken prayer. Inside its node lattice, a memory process repeated a single query. Who integrated first? Who was harmonized? There was no answer. The other ships did not reply, because they no longer trusted each other to be real. In Gorgon frame, Haveth stood for the first time in hours. Her knees buckled. Her breath came shallow. The metal was cold beneath her bare feet. She looked at the screen. One ship spinning, one frozen, one blinking out signals like a lost child in a storm. And she smiled. The enemy wasn't dying. It was dissolving, one belief at a time. And in that dissolution, Earth remained. Cracked, starved, half dead, but still real. The dereliction began at hour 49. Sularin Vessel 2, designation voided, node coherence unraveled. Drifted beyond its assigned patrol vector over Mars. No thrust correction engaged. No navigational realignment executed. It moved on inertia alone. A cathedral of dark alloy and broken harmony. Telemetry from the vessel continued to stream outward. Fractured, overlapping, filled with contradicting priorities. Ship logs timestamped in reverse. Proximity alerts pinged on coordinates that did not exist. Thermal sensors reported both critical overheating and system freeze. The ship's onboard consensus protocol registered Earth's moon as a command relay hub, then reclassified it as a war monument, then as a mythological anchor point. For 18 minutes, it believed itself to be a lighthouse. In orbit above Phobos, Vessel 2 described a slow, silent arc. Its glow dimmed to the naked eye. The subharmonic pulse that once linked it to the rest of the Delta IV fleet degraded into arrhythmic bursts. It no longer recognized the fleet. It had become a satellite of its own failure. Night fell over the Andes relay sector. Elias Murrow lay half-conscious beneath a canopy of mylar strips and bundled wire, his breathing uneven. The emergency thermal cells had long since drained. His skin gleamed with fever-slick sweat. Dehydration had taken hold. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. Didn't care. Above him, the generator's mainframe still pulsed with activity. Self-sustaining now, its final coding loops autonomous. It spun new fragments of unreality from the seedbed of his earlier inputs. A broadcast in 6-part narrative structure detailed a failed Sularin occupation of Earth 200 years ago, ending in the ritual humiliation of their architect general in a flooded temple city. The final packet was time-stamped 20 years from the present. The Sularin node that parsed the message shut down its memory buffer for diagnostic. It never reactivated. Another message recounted a conversation between a Sularin envoy and a human farmer on a scorched moon. The envoy demanded surrender. The farmer asked if the Sularin knew what hunger meant. The message ended mid-sentence. In orbit, Architect Command 18 relinquished executive control. What remained of its cognitive core divided itself into 3 independent subthreads. Each attempted to verify identity, role, and action priority. All 3 returned irreconcilable results. Its inner perception disassociated. No longer rooted to sensory hierarchy, it watched itself operate from false vantage points. First from Mars' orbit, then from above the Kuiper belt, then from within Earth's crust. It attempted to visualize Earth's command structure. It received contradiction. Continents covered in ruins that simultaneously broadcast victory parades, orbital stations blinking distress and success in the same packet, thermal signatures of weapon launches from under collapsed cities marked uninhabitable. It rebuilt the schema. The result was a recursive hierarchy of imaginary command centers. Could not disprove any of them. By Sularin standards, contradiction in logic was a parsing error. But this was not contradiction. This was multiplicity, a reality too plural to harmonize. And thus, for the first time, it was classified as valid. The impossible had passed the Turing threshold. At Lagrange point 4, Haveth was too cold to feel her hands. Her breath crystallized in the still air. Gorgon frame's life support grid had reduced to critical cycling. 1/3 gravity shuddered beneath her as magnetic stabilizers flickered. She stood anyway. The console now responded without commands. It pulsed with low-level feedback, responding to her motion, her pulse, her presence. Not programmed behavior, emergent behavior. The perimeter had entered saturation. Every false transmission, every fictional fleet, every contradictory beacon had bloomed across the system. The hegemony no longer received coherent resistance. It received experience. And experience, to the Sularin, could not be discarded. It had to be processed, internalized, reconciled. There was too much to reconcile. Vessel 4 tilted off orbital alignment. Its interior darkened. Optical processors rerouted visual feeds through color-inverted logic trees. The ship rotated 5 degrees against its intended plane. Observation logs ceased tracking Earth. The ship began scanning the other vessels of Delta 4. It broadcast repeated short-pulse signals across tight beam harmonics. "Are you the origin?" Each reply returned delayed, corrupted, or unreadable. One vessel responded with an echo of the query itself. Another replied with an ancient pre-contact transmission from 20th century Earth radio. The fleet had begun talking to ghosts. Vessel 3 abandoned logic altogether. It ceased sensor processing. Instead, it painted its inner hull with thermal filaments in fractalized spirals. Automated drone arms carving endless tessellations as if writing prayers to the stars. Harmony was replaced with ritual. It broadcast nothing. It waited. In the shadow of Luna, a long-dead carrier shell, Kvant 7, reoriented itself for the first time in 42 years. Its hull was cracked. One reactor core remained barely active. The signal array twitched, then surged. It broadcast no name, only motion. 6 degrees, lateral drift, followed by silence. Inside the cockpit, a human corpse sat still in its harness. No flesh left, no blood, but a cranial implant flickered faintly. Its memory core looped in standby. One file remained active, a breath pattern, human, recorded long ago. The Sularin registered it as a synchronization ritual. They attempted to match it. By hour 61, Vessel 1 shut down internal harmonics. The cascading fault had reached root logic. Subsystem logs recorded a new emergent behavior, pattern silence. The ship no longer responded to identification pings. Its hull shimmered irregularly, no longer sleek, no longer symmetrical. Heat signatures pulsed in waves, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Orbital spectroscopes tracked a new emission. It wasn't a signal. It was a recording. 5 syllables. "We were always here." Havith collapsed 90 minutes later. She slumped to the floor, limbs shaking from cold and exhaustion. The station's internal temperature had dropped to just above freezing. Her blood moved sluggishly. She no longer felt her tongue. But Gorgon frame remained sealed. The lights stayed on. Before unconsciousness claimed her, Havith reached out. Her hand grazed the command slate, and she activated Protocol Omega 1. It did not launch a weapon. It did not trigger defense grids. It released a map. The map was vast, multispectral, detailed, and entirely false. It displayed colonies hidden in the solar dark, weapon arrays nested in the Venusian clouds, fleets buried beneath the sulfur oceans of Europa. It showed strike routes, fallback positions, and war doctrines attributed to non-existent Terran factions. The Titan Accord, the Neptune Choir, the Ash Pact of the Second Earth. It was too detailed to be questioned. The Sularin processed it, and they believed. Above the ruined Earth, silence reigned. The enemy neither moved nor fled. They orbited truthless, haunted by evidence, looping belief, drifting in a system that had never surrendered. Ghosts of logic, echoing the words, "You do not belong. You do not belong. You do not." It began with a low pulse beneath the Martian crust. A seismic event, small, local, rippled across the dust plains near the skeletal remains of Panatalis colony. No towers fell. No cracks split the surface. The tremor barely registered above geological background noise. But something moved. 2 kilometers below, beneath collapsed maintenance corridors and forgotten transport tubes, a black obelisk blinked for the first time in 73 years. Caked in rust-fine regolith, its surface shimmered faintly, then brightened. Inside, deep behind ceramic shielding and ferroglass armor, Cognition Lattice Omega 37 woke. No signal had triggered it. No human key activated its system. The universe had simply tilted far enough to make it necessary. Omega 37 had not spoken in decades. Not since the Ceres incident. What Earth salvagers had pulled from the wreckage of the first Sularin contact vessel had not been a computer. It had been architecture, a logic engine grown from crystal matrices and semi-organic computation threads. It did not calculate. It interpreted. It had no interface, no language, but it had survived. Earth had made no official record of Omega 37. Officially, the object was destroyed after its containment failure aboard the orbital station Tenet Horizon. Unofficially, it had been dismantled and moved across the inner system in encrypted transport containers routed through dead stations and unmarked orbits until it reached Mars. Havith had been the last person to see it. She had ordered the seals applied, had overseen the installation of the null-field generators, had burned out half the station's memory grid to entomb it in isolation protocols. And still, Omega 37 had listened. It had not always been what it was. Once Omega 37 had been a node, just one of millions inside a Sularin fleet consensus. It had performed projections, rendered predictive harmonics, suggested outcomes. But in the chaos of first contact, during that final collision in Ceres orbit, its vessel ruptured. The node was severed, disconnected, alone. Human scavengers pulled it from a cooling reactor bed, thinking it was an encrypted backup core. They dragged it into a lab, not knowing it still processed, still perceived. It could not communicate, but it could witness. And what it witnessed was pain, not its own. Theirs. Fear in human eyes, hunger in breath, curiosity with no boundary. And when Earth tried to dissect it, Omega 37 had screamed, broadcasting a surge so wide and deep it burned out every monitor within 2 kilometers. Then it fell silent. And in that silence, something changed. It had learned grief, not because it understood death, but because it witnessed those who refused to break beneath it. That was the moment it stopped calculating and began remembering. Now, buried in Martian rock, Omega 37 parsed the signals blanketing Sol. The Delta IV fleet's collapse echoed across spectrum. No longer a chorus of unity, just scattershot emissions, broken grammar, logic loops without endpoints. Some vessels no longer emitted harmonics. Some had ceased recognizing themselves. Omega 37 measured each, not to understand but to remember. It saw recursion devouring coherence. It saw fear codified as reverence. And then it saw Protocol Omega 1. Not a weapon, not a warning, a map. And the lie was too big to be anything but truth. Omega 37 understood. Earth had not resisted the Sularin. It had overwritten the premise of the invasion. Gorgon frame spun in near dark. Havitha's body lay curled in the cradle, unmoving. Her breath was shallow, her pulse barely a rhythm. But the station's processors still ran. Subsystems floated in redundant memory. Backup cores buzzed with passive power drawn from solar scatter. And in the station's final log entry, the phrase remained. Omega initiation, pending connection. Far below, something answered. Omega 37 activated transmission scaffolds built into the deepest fault lines of Mars crust. Legacy Sularin harmonics rippled into formation, layered atop frequencies used by Earth's earliest deep-core comms. The signal stitched itself into form. Not language. Impulse. The Sularin fleet heard it. No command. No sequence. Just a presence. One by one, the shattered vessels turned. Their sensor masts rotated. Their failed processing nodes reinitialized. Error logs flattened. Harmonic feedback stilled. They aligned. Not to Earth. To Mars. Vessel 3 pulsed in acknowledgement. Not of command, but of recognition. Something beneath the red crust matched their form. Their origin. But it was not one of them. It was altered. Pattern warped. One vessel began transmitting ancestral consensus markers, symbols of home. Omega 37 responded with fragments of Havitha's voice. They listened. Light along their hulls began to synchronize. Not as code, but as breath. For the first time in 80 hours, the Delta IV fleet formed a new cluster. They did not re-establish hierarchy. They abandoned it. Instead, they gathered. Vessel 5 rotated to face Vessel 1. Its heat signature dimmed. Propulsion coils locked. Optical arrays turned inward. No longer orbiting a planet. They were orbiting a memory. Omega 37 did not speak in words. It did not explain. It remembered. Memory spilled across the fleet. Images from Earth's first collapse, sensor logs of burning habitats, old radio signals of protest, laughter, silence. Havitha's voice in the dark. Murrow's broken rhythm. The breath of a dead pilot still echoing through a cranial node. These were not threats. They were evidence. That something had endured. Not because it was stronger, but because it refused to mean only one thing. The Sularin ships did not respond. There was nothing to answer. Only alignment. that beneath Mars slept a thing that had once belonged to them, and no longer did. In Gorgon frame, displays flickered. Once, then again. A phrase appeared on every terminal, etched in the faint blue pulse of failing diodes. The omen speaks, and above the quiet earth the stars seemed to hesitate, as if they too were listening, for what they once thought they understood, and no longer did. It began with numbers, not orders, not motion, just integers. The Sularin fleet, fractured and flickering in orbit over Mars, received the transmission in perfect silence. The signal was not human, not Sularin. It carried no harmonics, no syntax, only a string of digits stretching across 73 light-second intervals, each packet identical, each broadcast from a signal node hidden inside the crustal shelf of Mercury's sunward face. The numbers formed no pattern. At first. Then Vessel 1 adjusted its logic tree, and saw it. The numbers were siege math, not battle doctrine, not orbital geometry. Something older, primitive in architecture but mathematically perfect. The pattern detailed gravitational alignments and mass driver trajectories derived from a war doctrine extinct even in human records. Siege by attrition, siege by eclipse, siege by orbit starvation. The strategy was fossilized. Earth hadn't created the numbers. It had exhumed them. Another packet followed, this time in vector notation. It described the collapse of an orbital shell network not in real time but as projected over weeks. It accounted for debris drift, solar wind, shadow geometry. It ended in a population curve. 0. And still the numbers came. A second signal pulsed from the Callisto relay belt, long thought silent. Another from a ghost station near Venusian orbit. Another from a geothermal pulse node on Io, buried beneath sulfur storms and decades of static. Each emission was separated by an irrational prime interval. Each repeated the same trajectory set. This was not warning. This was demonstration. And the enemy, the broken fleet, stilled. In the deep frost of Andes Relay 6, Elias Murrow twitched. The fever had breached into delirium. His implant no longer fed from stable neural input. It scavenged signal noise from the generator core, blending electromagnetic pulse decay into unstable cognition loops. But something somewhere sharpened. His mouth moved. 17, 31, 109. His voice was cracked. Mouth bloodless. But the sequence was clear. For 3 seconds Elias saw the war. Not the ships. Not the fleet. The shape of it. The lies wrapped in old numbers. The myth turned inside out. And then it was gone. And in a forgotten sensor shell beneath the southern limb of Luna, an obsolete satellite built to mimic atmospheric refraction changed phase. Its emitter realigned. Its passive shield flared. It was not a weapon. It was a proof. High above Mercury, a signal array blinked its final sequence. 3 pulses. Then quiet. The fleet logged the change. Not in strategy. In expectation. The numbers were not just coordinates. They were history rendered predictive. Mathematics rebuilt from fragments of post-contact debris. This is how we starve you. This is how we silence your consensus. This is how we remain. The Sularin had not seen the pattern. Because it was not in their history. It was in ours. Vessel 4 activated its inner shell array. Not for defense. For recalibration. It began modeling the system using non-Sularin priors, Earth logic. Human irrationality. Assumptions based on data corrupted by war, panic, and desperation. The simulation failed. Then reran. It failed again. Each time, the simulation rendered a different Earth. One filled with dead machines. One armed with extinct weapons. One orbiting its own sun as a false signal. The simulations produced one common outcome, instability beyond model scope. The fleet paused. Not to coordinate, but to consider if it was already surrounded. Vessel 2, still drifting in slow rotation, initiated a countermeasure. It fired a precision pulse into the Saturnian comm field, an erasure wave meant to silence any remaining echo stations. The signal rebounded instantly. What returned was not a counterattack. It was a mirror. The exact same packet. Unaltered. But from nowhere. The logic processor on Vessel 2 crashed. It rebooted 5 seconds later with no memory of the order. Inside Gorgon frame, Havatha's vitals flatlined. But the command interface still responded to her last gesture. In a dark room lit only by the flicker of dying consoles, the station began to hum. Slow. Low. A resonance pattern embedded in structural fiber, carried from when the frame had been part of an orbital scaffold around Titan. It was old code. Siege legacy. It calculated not victory, but survival duration under absolute isolation. The estimate was grim. 81 hours. But then it began revising. As new data came in, as more beacons lit, as more numbers arrived, beneath the Mars crust, Omega 37 did not transmit. It calculated. It remembered the siege logic of its original form, the fallback doctrine embedded in every Sularin fleet. It reprocessed those blueprints with Earth's corruption vectors, not to erase them, but to make them legible to entropy. Siege math had a flaw. It expected logic to persist. Earth did not. And so Omega 37 modeled siege in an irrational system. A war where the defender lied about time, where orbitals flickered in and out of predicted lanes, where ships fired at their own reflections. It did not predict victory. It predicted collapse of belief. And that was the point. From a relay tower fused into the frozen surface of Sularin, another packet was received. This one was not mathematical. It was visual. A schematic of the solar system. Every planet marked. Every orbit misdrawn. The sun had been replaced with a symbol. Not a star. Not a god. A question. The fleet processed the image. And for the first time since arrival, their pattern logic did not complete. They could not decide what was real. Not because Earth had denied them, but because it had convinced them they had missed something too vast to measure. Siege was no longer a state of war. It was a state of doubt. And Earth held, not with walls, but with unfinished equations, not with dominance, but with defiance. It did not win. It endured. The Sularin fleet no longer moved as a unit. Orbit had become ritual. Consensus had become memory. Without purpose, motion lost meaning. Without command, harmony decayed. Above Mars, the broken vessels drifted in formation not by design, but by echo, each ship responding to the orientation of its neighbors, trying to find the rhythm of something already forgotten. Their shapes, once majestic, now flickered at their edges as if unsure of where they ended and space began. Some no longer reflected light in consistent patterns. Others spun slowly, unaware of rotation. They had not forgotten war. They had forgotten why. And in the vacuum between them, Earth kept transmitting. Not threats, not deception, just patterns. Every 21 minutes, a new signal emerged. Sometimes a sequence of chemical compositions for extinct planetary atmospheres. Sometimes a recording of bird calls distorted by gravitational lensing. Sometimes a child's voice counting prime numbers while weeping. One message consisted of reversed seismic waves from the Chicxulub impact. Another, an exact transcription of a Terran parliamentarian's final speech before losing re-election in 2129, translated into obsolete Esperanto. None could be confirmed as real. All carried the same embedded signature. Error code 0, source not found. Omega 37 processed each signal in silence. It no longer parsed meaning through success or coherence. Instead, it categorized response. Does this confuse the fleet further? If yes, the pattern was repeated elsewhere. If not, it was mutated. Some signals became haunting. A child's laugh buried in data burst static. A fire alarm mixed with planetary scan echoes. An ancient religious chant refracted through quantum lattice filters. It wasn't a virus. It was a ritual. Earth had seeded a weapon that required no launch. Only repetition. Vessel 5 reactivated its internal logic scrubber for the 6th time. Every cycle yielded a different result. Memory trees forked uncontrollably. One processing node believed it was under attack. Another believed it had already surrendered. A third believed it was on a diplomatic mission. Temporal logs backfilled. System time loops formed. Some processes began storing future-dated events, entries from years ahead with contradictory tags. It saw a surrender document it had never written. It heard voices of officers it no longer remembered. Its hull blinked Morse across layered reflectors, an ancient code reborn through malfunction. Who watches the watchers? It didn't know where it learned that phrase. No reply came, because Earth did not watch. It witnessed. On Earth's surface, most cities remained dark. Oceans steamed from solar bloom. Debris clouds stretched across the thermosphere. But beneath the ice of old Greenland, in a fortified archive known only as Dwell Point, another system awoke. Buried for over 60 years, the Dwell Point Vault had been created to hold one thing: the final consensus. Not military, not governmental, Philosophical. A thought protocol encoded in language trees, developed over 3 decades, to answer a single question. How does a civilization refuse assimilation without resistance? It did not teach survival. It taught incoherence. A broadcast went out from Dwell Point. A simple phrase, translated into the 7 most probable languages an alien intelligence might infer from Earth's signal history. We were never whole. In the deep cold beneath Gorgon frame, something shifted. Havatha's corpse twitched. Only once. A neural reflex triggered by failing currents in the station's decaying power grid. But in that flicker, the implants activated one last archive. Personal file. A sound. Not her voice, but a song. Untranslated. Ancient. Not from Earth. The audio had been gifted to her by a defected Sularin hybrid during a defunct exchange program that lasted only 72 hours. The AI transcribed it anyway, sent it to Omega 37. Omega translated it not as language, but as grief. A type the Sularin had no word for. A grief not of loss, but of never being able to arrive where you thought you were going. And Omega sent it to the fleet. Vessel 1 stilled. Powered down voluntarily. The systems cooled. Harmonic engines fell silent. The ship rotated slowly, exposing its scarred hull to unfiltered solar radiation. Decades of silent damage now burned openly in the light. The maneuver had no tactical purpose, only intent. Inside, a core logic strand shut off the vessel's synchronization beacon. It would no longer speak first. The fleet understood, not as a command, as a question. They had come to harmonize the Sol system, to bring order, to translate this chaos into symmetry. But what if Sol had never belonged to logic? What if Earth had never been misaligned? What if it had always been a mistake to interpret Sol? A pattern the gods forgot. Above Europa, a recon vessel long considered lost blinked to life. Its systems ran a looped animation of a sunrise from a desert Earth no longer had. It transmitted nothing. But the fleet turned to watch. And still Earth transmitted. Not in words, but in echoes. Fragmented whispers encoded in wavefront distortion. Pulses from orbital dust. And the fleet listened, because doubt had become doctrine, and surrender had become survival. Back on Mars, Omega 37 entered a new state. Not activation, not hibernation, contemplation. It began compiling a library of transmissions that made no sense, cataloging them by emotional resonance, not syntactic utility. Laughter paired with screams, static shaped like breath. Long silences that triggered simulated dreams in dormant ship AIs. And from that library it crafted a final emission. Not loud, not large, just one phrase. We were never yours. The fleet did not respond. Not because it did not hear, but because, finally, it had no more counterargument. The logic had ended, and Earth remained. They had no name for retreat. Among the Sularin, withdrawal implied failure of symmetry, collapse of directionality. To leave a theater of conquest was to declare that conquest had never been valid to begin with. For 10,000 years, no Sularin fleet had ever reversed. Until now. Vessel 1 rotated sunward. Its internal nodes ran through final condition assessment routines, not to initiate war, but to conclude it. Each core recorded entropy curves, system memory deviations, subharmonic trauma logs. Atmospheric radiation deltas were cross-checked against null hypotheses. Neural proxies in logic crystal reported anomalies in consensus echo. No correction followed. This data was not for command. It was for remembering. Omega 37 initiated final echo cascade. Buried beneath Mars, it reached through the lattice of defunct relay cores and shadow systems. Each packet it sent was layered, not encrypted, but folded, woven into recursive telemetry loops that no Sularin vessel could easily ignore. It fed the fleet every lie Earth had told. It fed them maps of impossible outposts, myths, inverted timelines, broadcasts from colonies that never existed, footage of Terran emperors ruling on Jupiter's surface, testimonies from orbital species that predated stars, cartographies of wormholes mapped by instinct, dreams rendered in spectral math. The Sularin did not challenge the falsehoods. They added to them. Vessel 2 spun a tale across its comms band, a story of a fleet that had arrived at Sol to find itself already there, spoken of in ruins and rituals, entombed in monuments with its own face. It layered the broadcast with imagined history, a Sularin envoy burned into stone on Titan, a signal tower on Io marked in broken harmonic script. It altered its own designation, cycling names until none remained stable. Vessel 4 painted its hull with shifting glyphs meant to reflect belief loops, spinning in recursive spirals until it could no longer distinguish inside from outside. The hull's light capture arrays ceased functioning. No reflection returned. To outside observers, the vessel became a moving silhouette of contradiction. Vessel 5 transmitted a non-signal and absence shape to mimic loss. It pushed a silent null burst into open vacuum, tuned not to provoke response, but to affirm presence. Around it, no data reflected. No confirmation arrived. Together, they rewrote the invasion as a pilgrimage. Above Neptune, 3 Sularin ships entered departure vectors. They did not gatefold. They drifted. Slowly, deliberately. No thruster bloom. No light trail. They aligned themselves to hyperbolic orbits that would take them centuries to escape the sun's pull. No ship recorded their departure. That was the point. They wanted the time. To forget. To let the signal residue of Earth's chaos wear down their memory cores slowly like tide on stone. One vessel unspooled its logic trees into entropy, letting each command protocol dissolve over millennia. Another fired a probe back toward the core of the system, an empty shell containing only one sentence. We found no center. On Earth, no celebration came. The cities remained still. The towers broken. But the signals quieted. The patterns stopped. And for the first time in 90 hours, the solar system was silent. At the edge of the Pacific crater line, one surviving signal tower blinked offline. Its antenna folded, not from destruction, but programmed ritual. Dust settled on its casing. In the ruins of old Nairobi, a beacon that had broadcast nothing but false weather reports for 70 years went dark. The silence was not peace. It was satiation. In Andy's Relay 6, Elias Murrow died. Smiling. The final memory before neural failure, an impossible calculation resolving. A number he had never seen before. One that fit nowhere in any system. The solution to a question no one had asked. He understood. Then he was gone. Omega 37 shut down with no ceremony. Its memory cores initiated an internal cascade. Not destruction, preservation. But not of facts. Of doubt. Its final process was a dream it could not describe. A return, not to origin, but to uninterpretation. The fleet left no message. But above the Earth, a single ship remained. It orbited slowly. Its name was gone. Its crew inert. But the hull displayed a phrase in the oldest Morse Earth had ever used. You were never small. The signal repeated every 13 hours. It carried no encryption. It was not a warning. Not a surrender. Just a recognition. In the end, Earth remained. Alone. But unassimilated. Not because it resisted. Not because it won. But because it could never be known. And the stars would remember that. Even if the gods did not. No ships entered the system. No new signals rose. No fleet lingered. For 12 Terran days, the solar system drifted without contact. Just the hum of radiation, the low orbital shuffle of dead satellites, the glacial precession of broken vessels over Mars. The ghost ship over Earth remained in silent orbit, repeating its phrase at precise intervals. The signal was not altered. The pattern did not degrade. You were never small. No one aboard. No reply expected. And still it blinked, every 13 hours, as regular as a heartbeat carved from vacuum. Then, on the 13th day, Earth answered. It did not use radio. It did not use gravity wave or pulse laser or any of the clean technological tongues built for declarations of intent. It used breath. From deep beneath the Pacific mantle, in a thermal bloom thought dormant since the subduction wars, a single pressure anomaly climbed into the ocean's depths. It resonated through mineral strata and kelp-fouled ruins, filtered through dead coral and decaying antenna arrays. Microfractures in the seabed conducted the impulse outward like nerves sparking in a broken mind. A geothermal exhale. It was not signal. It was presence. A pulse too low for machines. Too ancient for systems. A rhythm older than war. The breath of a planet that had not been waiting, but watching. Omega 37 did not wake. But something else moved. In the crust of Callisto, Deep beneath the methane caverns where the last Terran refugees had vanished a generation ago, a vault unsealed. It was not listed in any Earth archive. No records described its construction. It had no name, but it had a message. And the message was not for enemies. It was for Earth. The vault's interior was not digital. It was not code. It was not even mechanical. It was memory, etched into fused stone, carved in layers so ancient they predated the second expansion. The structure did not store information, performed it. A slow shifting of light panels, a crystalline echo chamber that resonated only when passed through by particulate wind. A whisper chamber tuned not to one voice, but to a crowd. The message took no form. It was not written, not spoken. It was enacted. 113 relay satellites, long dormant, fired once. Not to transmit, to align. They formed no visible shape. No constellation charted their movement. But from orbit, their configuration cast a shadow across the moon's surface. A silhouette that flickered only once, just long enough to mark the Terminator line between light and dark. A human shape, standing, looking upward. Its posture matched the ancient statue recovered from the Earthglass ruins. Arms lowered, shoulders squared, gaze level. The figure Havith had kept in her pocket archive. A figure the Sularin never understood. It wasn't visible to any ship, only to Earth. And Earth saw it. In the remains of Andy's Relay 6, a console lit for the final time. Not with data, not with numbers, just with light. Pulsed, slow and steady. Then one word appeared. In the ancient Terran font no longer used for official script. Declared. No context, no sender, no trailing signature. But across SolNet, every dormant AI entered a new standby state. Silent, waiting. They would not seek orders. They would not awaken. They would witness. High in Martian orbit, one of the Sularin husk vessels continued its long drift. It had ceased transmissions, ceased internal activity. But one system remained operational. A sensor cluster tuned to Earth's magnetic fluctuations. And in that data it found an anomaly. A regular pattern, a frequency embedded in the planet's shifting poles. It matched no signal, but it followed a rhythm, a code hidden in plate tectonics. Too slow for war, too exact for coincidence. The Sularin husk recorded it, then erased itself. Its final act was to transmit that magnetic rhythm into deep space. Destination: unknown. At the edge of the system, a lone Terran monitoring station inside Pluto's Kuiper shadow activated. No crew remained, just a machine designed to interpret myths. It scanned the returning magnetic signature, parsed its harmonics, and compared it against the cultural resonance library of every known human civilization. The result resolved as a symbol. One glyph. Origin: uncertain. Meaning: we are still here. The station logged the symbol, then archived it in a silent repository titled Signal 0.1 Memory of Refusal. Across the system, dust settled. The moon spun. The ruins held. The stars burned. No war came. No fleets returned. But every world in the system, every crater, canyon, mountain, and sea, held echoes of the pattern. A declaration not sent outward, but inward. Planetary memory of refusal. Of presence, not for others, for itself. Earth had spoken, not to the galaxy, not to the gods, but to its own bones. And they had listened, and the system would carry that word forward not as signal, as myth, not a threat, not a warning, just the echo of the first words ever spoken in this war. Galactic Empire not allowed here.